Right, good morning everyone again. Right, as you're all very well aware, today is Remembrance Sunday, when we remember all those that gave their lives or fought for our freedom. In doing so, they put their lives on the line so that we may be free. All gave some gave all, but they were all willing to give everything so that we may have freedom. That is something that we must never forget. There are people around now who say it's in the past, it's time to move on, it's time to forget about it. And to that I say, what absolute nonsense. Absolute crazy. These people that say that are ungrateful. They don't realise the only reason they can look to the future is because of what these heroes did in the past. We must never forget them. They say it's not a day we should celebrate anymore. Celebrate? They don't even know what they're arguing about. Today is not a day of celebration. It's a day of remembrance and honouring the people that gave their lives for us, that gave the sacrifice so that we could be free. In the D-Day landings, the soldiers on the boats, as they were approaching the shore, they were that terrified that they started to sweat drops of blood because they could see the sheer terror that they were heading into. Now, I guess that most of us here have seen a film about the D-Day landings or actual footage from the D-Day landings. And the thing is, it doesn't come close to actually being able to put across the terror that they were heading into. If a horror film about war and things like that, you're going to find that they got an 18 certificate, and for good reason. But if a film could actually portray this violence, the suffering, the sheer terror that they was facing, it would have to be given a new certificate. And that certificate would be NO, as in nobody should see this, or nobody should experience this. Because you just can't imagine the terror and the fear that they went through, but they still went into it. The phrase looking down the barrel of a gun doesn't come anywhere close to describing what they faced, but yet they went head on into that terror so that we may have freedom today. Most paid for our freedom with their lives, so who survived were ever changed as well. Luke 22:44. And being in agony, he prayed even more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Jesus, before his death, knew what was about to happen to him. He knew he was going to suffer beyond comprehension. He knew that it was not going to be a quick death. He knew that it was not going to be an easy death. He knew he was going to suffer immense pain, humiliation, mockery, everything. Nobody on this earth should ever have to go through. He was beaten so badly that he was beyond human recognition. Again, there is not a film out there about the crucifixion that has or possibly could show the true extent of Jesus' injuries. It would just be too gruesome. Isaiah 52:14. Just as there was many who appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. That is something nobody should ever have to go through. In Matthew 26:39, Jesus asked God if what was about to happen could be taken away from him. But then he said, "But not my will, your will be done." Because he knew how important what was about to happen was, and his love for us was that immense, he gave everything for us. Over the course of history, these are the only two times I know of people or someone who sweat in blood because of sheer terror of what they were about to go through. There possibly could be other occasions, but these are the only ones that I've ever been able to find, any ones that have ever been recorded. I know about Jesus went before the cross. He went to the cross. And the soldiers, they were waiting to land, and they could see the horror that they would be going into. That is why every year we have Remembrance Sunday. And I pray that no matter what anyone thinks, we never stop having it, lest we forget. But for us as Christians, every Sunday is Remembrance Sunday. We come together to remember what Jesus did for us, the ultimate sacrifice that he made so that we may be completely free. People of the world, they want us to forget about the cross. In fact, they try to convince us that the whole notion is stupid. But once you have stepped into the freedom that only Christ can give you, you can't deny it as much as the world wants you to. That is why every month we start with a special service, communion, to remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for us, because it is so important. It's not just a religious thing that we do. It sets you up for the month. It helps you focus your mind on Jesus. It gives you strength. It renews you when you put Jesus at the front. We are surrounded by a world that wants us to forget what sacrifices have been made for us, what was given up for us. I think it's because we live in a world where self is first, and that is diminished by the only reason you can have what you have is down to someone else's sacrifice. In a world where everything is about yourself, you can do what you want, when you want, and there are no consequences. If you consider the fact that people paid the ultimate price so you can be free, and Jesus paid the ultimate price, you may have freedom from sin and enter into glory. Your achievements, what you've achieved, it doesn't seem so grand, so great when you think about the fact you can only achieve what you've achieved because of the sacrifices that have been made for you. And I think that's why people want us to forget about the cross. They want us to forget about the sacrifices the brave soldiers made. Because if they didn't make them sacrifices, we wouldn't be living the life that we live today. And I think that takes away from them. They should be embracing that though. They should ever be grateful, because then people died for our freedom. They gave everything. I'll be honest, Remembrance Day is a challenge to me. When I look at the cross, it's a challenge to me. Would I be brave enough to do what those soldiers did? Or would I turn and run? Would I be able to do what Jesus did? Certainly not as a sacrifice to save the world. I'm not sinless, spotless, without blemish. I would be no good as a sacrifice. But would I have the strength to be bold enough, brave enough to do what he did and go to the cross, knowing what was coming? Or would I turn and run? I don't know. And it's a challenge to me every time I think about it. I would like to think that I would make that sacrifice, but it's a hard challenge. And it's something you can't answer until you're faced with it. And I pray that none of us ever will be faced with anything like that. But it makes me feel uncomfortable about it. It makes me feel grateful, but it makes me, when I think of would I do that, it's a challenge. Thankfully, for us, the sacrifice was made. We were redeemed. We are able to enter into his freedom. Our sins are washed away. Thankfully for us, the war was won and we live in freedom. So many people around the world right now are not that fortunate. We should never forget them in our prayers. We can never forget, we must never forget what was given for us. We can easily forget though what God has done for us in our lives. The fact that he's delivered us from sin into freedom. We only have that freedom because of his grace. And if that is all God ever did for us, that would be more than we deserve. But God has given each of us more than just freedom from sin. I'm sure anyone in this room will be able to testify to that, because we have such an amazing God. But when we are facing the next problem, that can seem so far away, ancient history. We tend to forget what God has already done for us, especially when the going gets tough, or when we get bogged down with everything that is happening now. Everything else seems Listen, but it doesn't matter what God has done in the past. All that matters is the here and now. We forget how big God is. If we don't get the answer to prayer that we want when we want it, we forget that there is nothing bigger than God. There is nothing he can't deal with or overcome for us. We forget that God's timing is always perfect. He's never early, he's never late. When God moves, it's in his time, and the time is always the right time. If we would remember, we would know this, but we don't remember. When we have a new problem, we want it dealt with now. It's human nature. We only think about what's right in front of us. So I urge you, the next time that you have a problem, take a moment, take a step back and look at the bigger picture. It's hard for us to do, but we need to open our eyes and see that God has this. He will never let us down, and we need to trust him through everything. We don't want to be like the Israelites in the desert. Exodus 16, 1-3. The old Israelite community set out from Elim, and they came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month, after they had come out of Egypt, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If we only had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around with pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us into this desert so that we may starve this entire assembly to death." Now let's be honest, what an ungrateful bunch. What a very short memory they had. They'd just been freed from slavery. They'd been part of and witnessed some of the biggest miracles ever. They witnessed the Red Sea part in front of their very eyes, and they walked right through the middle of it. You'd think that's not something that you're going to easily forget. And then to top it off, the Egyptians showed up, their former slave masters, the ones that had made their lives hell. The Egyptians followed them into the parted sea, and the walls of the sea came crashing down and wiped them all out, securing the Israelites' freedom from slavery. The Israelites soon forgot this, though. Why? Because their bellies were rumbling. They were focused on the problem in hand, not the bigger picture. God had just freed them, but because they were hungry, they thought it would be better to go back to Egypt, because they had meat there. They were hungry, and that's all that mattered. Food was more important than freedom. They didn't see that God was still with them. Why on earth would he take them out of captivity just to let them starve to death in the desert? What would be the point of that? When someone is going through a rough time, have you ever heard them say, "Where's God in all this?" The answer is always the same, right there with you. He never left you. You just stopped looking for him, or talking to him, or trusting in him. It didn't stop there with the Israelites. They got manna to feed them. That wasn't good enough. They kept moaning and wanted meat, so God gave them quail. They just moaned constantly. It went on for ages. There are times when you read in Exodus, you can think, didn't I just read that? Because they just don't stop complaining. They don't stop moaning. It just sounds like the same complaints over and over. When they were left on their own, when Moses went to speak to God, and because he was gone for a while, not only did they forget about God, but they also built a new God, a golden calf to worship. When I read this, it just baffles me how they can think that something they made was a God. Maybe quail isn't good for your brain. Don't know. I mean, come on. They knew what Moses was doing. They knew he'd gone to speak to God. If I was there, I would be sat at the bottom of that mountain, eagerly waiting for Moses to come back. I wouldn't care how long it was. If I knew somebody who could speak personally to God, I would want to hang on to their every word, to listen to everything that they were going to tell me, because I knew they was in communion with God directly. I would be sat at the bottom of that hill, that mountain, waiting for Moses to come back. But no, they couldn't wait. They went and built a calf and called it God. How they could be that daft to think that something that they have physically just made is God. That's crazy. I don't understand it. It shows how much grace God has. I would have sent him back to Egypt personally. But God isn't me. And he's amazing. So today, do not be like the Israelites. God rescued us from the path of destruction we were on. We were slaves to sin. He freed us. He never promised us a life free from pain or suffering, but he promised us that he would never leave us or forsake us. And when we remember that, anything we are going through will just seem smaller and you will feel stronger. We must never forget how we got that freedom, the sacrifice that Jesus made for us, what God has done for us. We must never forget the sacrifice that the brave soldiers made for us. And both did it so that we may have freedom today. Amen.
Amen.